Hello again, my friends. Wow, we have a super talk just right now. She's probably one of the most talented researchers in the world. Her name is Nina Mazar. Nina Mazar is a professor of marketing and co-director of the Susilo Institute for Ethics in the Global Economy at Western School of Business at Boston University. Nina was the 2019 president of the Society for Judgment and Decision Making and has been named one of the 40 most outstanding B school profs under 40 in the world in 2014. She is also the co-founder of BigWorks, a behavioral economics company. Nina, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. So you can hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you pretty well. Thank you. I can't thank you enough for being here. I'm so curious about your talk, the dishonesty of honest people, and I think everybody is looking forward to hearing you. I don't want to take your time. Remember, 40 minutes, and then questions and answers. Nina, thank you very much. Your
Well,
time.
thank you very much for the very, very kind introduction. So I'm blushing. Um, so welcome, everyone. I know it's very late in Europe, but thank you for staying online to hear my talk. I wanted to take the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the research that I have been doing for the last almost 20 years, primarily with my advisor and mentor, Dan Ariely. And I'll also touch upon some research by a few other of my colleagues where I have not been involved, but they have been doing amazing work in that field as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the dishonesty of honest people. And usually when I give this talk, it is a bit more interactive than what we have here right now, but I would like you to think about a lie you have recently told and think about what was the lie, who did you tell it to, why did you tell it, and how did you feel about it? So if you can take a few seconds, just think about something. Usually we lie quite often per day and per week, so it should be relatively easy to come up with something. And usually when I ask this question, I get examples that are more of a kind that I would like to show in a video. And I don't know if videos work. So let me know if this works. If no, then I will just tell you what happens in it. Okay. Let's just see if this will work.
Oh, he's a cute little snuggly baby.
Isn't he gorgeous?
Ew.
Isn't he gorgeous? Oh, he's gorgeous. Yes.
So very gorgeous.
Michael, shut the door. You're letting bugs in.
Is it me, or was that the ugliest baby you have ever seen?
Oh, I couldn't look. It was like a Pekingese.
Boy, a little too much chlorine in that gene pool. And you know, the thing is, they'll never know. No one's ever going to tell them.
Oh, you have to lie.
Oh, it's a must-lie situation.
Yes.
Let me just move on. So the idea here is that it is a must-lie situation. So situations where you want to spare someone the truth because you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, right? And we grow up learning that those lies are okay, right? And so those are so-called white lies. These are not the lies that I think we need to worry about, and it's not something that I want to talk about today. But instead, I want to talk about the types of lies that we typically associate with faces like these from Enron and also companies such as Enron, Arthur Andersen, WorldCom, Tyco, you name it. And usually when we think of these companies or of the Bernie Madoffs of the world, we think of people like these ones here in my slide where it says, honesty is the best policy. Okay, now, what is the second best policy? So the idea here is there are a few bad apples in this world. Those are clearly people that don't have any morals. For them, any decision, whether to be honest or dishonest, is a decision where they just basically weigh the costs and the benefits. But morality never really plays a weight or plays a role in their decisions. And for those kind of people, you can imagine that law enforcement or regulations is enough. If you see that you see those kind of transgressions where you increase the punishments, you increase the chance of being caught, you're decreasing the potential benefits of misconduct. But the point is, when you look at the dishonesty that is happening around us, there is just so much dishonesty happening in everyday life, in our private lives as well as in our work lives, that it's really hard to imagine that this is being done by a few bad apples. And here are a few numbers. A few of them are old by now. There are newer numbers, but just to give you a sense, at least 3/4 of consumers understand that peer-to-peer downloading is illegal, yet about 50% acknowledge that they participate in illegal downloading. Fraud in the US property and casual insurance industry was estimated way back in the early 2000s at 10% of total claims. This is about 24 billion annually. The tax gap in the US from non-filing, underreporting, or underpayment was estimated at 450 billion. And we look at the world and the amount of bribes paid annually. There has been an estimate that this is over $1 trillion US, so about 3% of the world GDP. So there's just so much dishonesty that it's hard to believe that this is just done by a few bad apples. So what we need to do is we have to look at the majority of people, like you and me, that do have morals, that think very highly of themselves. Maybe we play a role when it comes to dishonesty that we see in the world. And when it comes to the majority of people like you and me, what we know is people in general care about thinking positively about themselves and they think of themselves as being highly moral people. And what I really loved is the Josephson Institute of Ethics here in the US, and they do almost an annual or biannual survey of high school students in the US. And these are the numbers from 2010. And you see here, 98% of over 40,000 high school students in the US say it is important to be a person of good character, to be honest, to be trustworthy. And there are also studies that show that bribery is considered a morally repugnant business practice actually across the world, despite the fact that we see that bribes make up about 3% of the world GDP. So how does that fit, right? So how is it possible that we have so much dishonesty, yet the majority of people thinks of itself as moral? And sometimes authors of comic books or stories can actually bring the point across much better than we researchers in simpler language. And here's a short cartoon or comic that I think explains it quite well. So you see here, this is from Calvin and Hobbes. It says here, today at school, I tried to decide whether to cheat on my test or not. I wondered, is it better to do the right thing and fail, or is it better to do the wrong thing and succeed? On the one hand, undeserved success gives no satisfaction. But on the other hand, well-deserved failure gives no satisfaction either. Of course, most everybody cheats sometime or other. People always bend the rules, and if they think they can get away with it, then again, that doesn't justify my cheating. Then I thought, look, cheating on one little test isn't such a big deal. It doesn't hurt anyone. But then I wondered if I was just rationalizing my unwillingness to accept the consequence of not studying. Still, in real world, people care about success, not principles. Then again, maybe that's why the world is in such a mess. What a dilemma in this particular case. So what did you decide? Nothing. I ran out of time and I had to turn in a blank paper. So this is basically to show that most of us who do have high morals, we have developed so many ways to rationalize our actions, so that as long as we don't cheat that much. We can actually do both things. We can cheat a little bit and so get the benefits of being dishonest, whether it is getting a higher tax return, getting more expenses reimbursed, you name it. But as long as we do it just by a little bit, we can come up with all kinds of rationalizations so that we can still maintain our positive view, our positive moral view about ourselves. And if that is the truth, so if there is a bunch of people that engage in this kind of dishonesty, as also shown here in the slide, wait, those weren't lies, that was just spin, then the question becomes, well, what kind of measures are the more appropriate one for the majority of people like you and us who also engage in dishonest behavior? And so this is basically what I've spent my research time on over the last 20 years. And to give you a sense of how did we even study dishonesty, to answer those kind of questions, such as, okay, well, what kind of interventions can we think of to get people to be less likely to engage in transgressions? And so we as researchers needed a tool to measure dishonesty. We have various different tools, but they're all of the same kind. So let me just give you a very, very basic idea. So imagine you are a test participant of ours, you come to our experiment, and I give you a matrix test sheet that looks like this. And what I tell you, well, on this sheet, you will see 20 matrices or 20 boxes. They each consist of 4 times 3, so 12 numbers. And in each matrix or box, you need to find 2 numbers that add up exactly to 10. And when you found them, you circle them and you check the got it box, right? And then in the end, you fill out a collection slip where you write down how many matrices you solved. And you give both of these, your test sheet and your collection slip, to the experimenter. And the experimenter then verifies your answer. And for each matrix that you solve correctly, you get paid. In this particular case, 50 cents. So here you have no chance to cheat. And we can measure on average how many such matrices do people actually solve. But then a second group of people we invite to the lab, we give them the same test. They do the test. When they're done, they fill out the collection slip. They say how many matrices they have solved. But then I tell them, shred the test sheet and only submit the collection slip to the experimenter. So here now, obviously, there is a chance to cheat because the test sheet with my performance is gone. And all that I'm doing is I'm self-reporting my performance. And then we check on average, what do people report here? And we compare it to the condition or to the group of people who were not able to cheat. And then we can even make it more extreme. Imagine I bring you to the lab, you participate in the matrix task, you fill out the collection slip, and you know that after that, you're shredding both of these, your test sheet and your collection slip. You're not even facing an experimenter. Instead, you're walking over to the back of the room where you will find a jar filled with money, you pay yourself, and you work out, and you walk out. So in this particular case, you could even take out more money than one could actually make on this test. And so now that we have a tool or a method to study how people generally deal with conflicts of interest, now we can research it and try to understand what is happening. And so with the study, which I just described to you, we had a different variant of it where people could actually solve 50 questions. And you can see in the no cheating condition, people truly were able to solve about 32.5 out of 50 questions. And we asked participants to predict what they thought would happen if people now had a chance to cheat. So cheating 1 is the condition where they still have to go to the experiment and self-report how many questions they've solved. And in the cheating condition 2, there is no experimenter involved. People just pay themselves out of a jar, right? And people predict as the likelihood basically of being caught decreases, that cheating would go up. But when we actually run the experiment and see what we find, we actually see that people cheat, but only by a small amount. And that amount is not dependent on what the likelihood is of being caught. So And we also find when we run these studies, and there have been a number of those, that those people that engage in those dishonest actions feel equally moral. So we don't find a difference between people in the no cheating condition and the cheating condition. They equally feel being relatively moral people. Now you could argue, well, you're showing me means, Nina. Who knows? Maybe these are a few people that cheat all the way, so you still have a few bad apples, and then a bunch of people that are honest. No, what we find is when you look at the number of questions people can solve on the x-axis, and on the y-axis, the percent of participants that said that they have solved each of that, and the black bars is the real performance, or the no cheating group, and the red bar is the cheating one group. You see that we find a general shift. So almost everybody cheats, but just by a small limited amount, and still feels moral. And it doesn't matter what the chance of being caught is. And again, we find this over and over again. And the idea here is, because if you're cheating only by a small amount, you can still reap at least some benefits of the transgressions while using rationalizations to still feel good about yourself. You don't have to update basically who you are as a person, or you don't have to update your beliefs about yourself. Let me just check the time. And so the next question becomes is, well, if we want to finally get to the stage where we think about, well, what could be some interventions that companies or individuals can use to reduce transgressions, we first need to understand, well, what facilitates rationalizations that makes it easier for people to give in and still feeling good about themselves. And there has been a lot of research, not just by me, but Francesca Gino, Shachar, Ayal, I already mentioned, Dan Ariely, Maurice Schweitzer, a bunch of people that are doing beautiful work, Charles Shalvey, and so on and so on. And I have a slide here, and I have a slide that gives an idea of what the main rationalizations are. But I would like to invite you to think about, well, what kind of rationalizations may you have used in the past that you can think of. And I have one more video that shows one extremely common rationalization.
That is the most dishonest thing I've ever heard. I should box your ears. You sneaky Pete.
Is it,
Hey, you easy. Now get off my property. Off.
Hey, Flanders, who put that bug up your butt?
Oh, I wanted to subscribe to that new arts and crafts channel. Well, sir, they send over this flim-flam man to install it. You know what he did? He offered to hook me up illegally to every cable channel for only $50.
Boy, what's this world coming to?
You know, that's exactly what I...
Gotta go. Ooh! Hey, stop, cableman, stop! What do you want? I want free cable. So this is okay, isn't it? I mean, everybody does it, right?
What? Oh, hey, if you're having second thoughts, just read this pamphlet.
So you've decided to steal cable.
Uh-huh.
Myth. Cable piracy is wrong. Fact. Cable companies are big, faceless corporations, which makes it okay.
See, the clown is a treasure that will last a lifetime.
Cable.
And you get the
It's
pleasure
more
of-
wonderful than I dared hope.
So you can probably already guess it. So the one very, very common rationalization is, well, everybody does it. It's almost like, well, it's the norm. So it is not a big deal. Just move on, and you can see services out there that use it. You know, I'm a professor, and I know that there are websites out there that offer students to write papers or to find already written papers, and you see things such as, it's not cheating, it's collaborating. Similar things with job references. You can actually buy fake job references, and this particular one says there's absolutely nothing illegal about the service, and we have assisted nearly 100 clients towards employment. So making you feel like everybody does it, or at least a substantial amount of people is doing it. So it's okay, or maybe even you may be missing out if you're not participating. And as promised, I have a slide up here with a few more factors that facilitate rationalizations. This is not an exhaustive list, but we know from there are some individual differences in terms of how much self-control people have. The more self-control, the less likely they are to give in to temptations. The more creative they are, what do you think happens? Well, the more creative they are, the better they are at coming up with rationalizations. So the more likely they are to give in to temptations. But then there are also a lot of contextual factors, such as how much time do you have? What are the social norms, which I just showed with those videos and those websites. Also, whether you think you have been treated unfair, so then it's okay to create fairness again. Whether your transgression will not only benefit yourself, but maybe also others. Whether your transgression is an act of commission, so you actively have to do something versus you simply don't have to do anything and you get the benefits. So just think of yourself, you're finding yourself at a cash register at the store and you get more change back than what you deserved. If you don't do now anything, you're benefiting, right? But you don't really have to do anything. And it's still an unethical act, but acts of omission are easier than acts of commission. It also depends on whether we are more in a collectivist or an interdependent society, whether we have just done a good deed, and so on and so on and so on. And let me just give you a few examples for these particular factors. So there is this research by Simon Gechter and Schulz from 2016, showing, for example, that there is quite a large difference in the prevalence of rule violations around the world. So the greener, the less rule violations, the more red, the more rule violations. And I've done some work, for example, it seems to suggest that the more collectivist the country is, the more likely are companies to bribe. And one of the factors that we find is that the more collectivism there is, the easier it is to diffuse responsibility onto others. There's also research that I've also contributed to on licensing. So this idea of if you've just done something good and you feel very good about yourself. So if you've done something morally good and you pat yourself basically on the back, say, oh, Nina, you're such a good moral person. Now you basically earned yourself some credits. And so the next time around, when you are tempted to be dishonest, it's easier to give in and not feel bad about yourself. It's think of yourself of a balance. While on the other hand, if you've just done a moral transgression, next time when you're presented with a possibility or an opportunity to transgress, you may be less likely to transgress because you want to balance out again how you feel about yourself. And in an example that I did with my colleague Chen Bozong at the Rotman School, we randomly assigned people to either shop in a store that had primarily green and organic products versus primarily conventional products. And we found in a pretest actually that people thought of shopping, that people who shop in a green store have higher moral values. And sure enough, what we found is after shopping in a green store, and this is the green bar versus the conventional store, which is the white bar, we find that significantly more people lie when they report their performance. And not just that, they also stole more money from us. And then it's also such that some actions are just worse than others. I mean, I'm not personally a golf player, but I'm sure it's not okay if you didn't hit the ball into the hole, that you pick it up and you drop it into the hole when nobody sees it. But, it seems a little bit different if you're very close by and you do a little foot wedge. Similar, it seems easy and okay to take a pencil from work. You wouldn't even call it stealing, but you would not just take that same amount of money, that value of that pencil out of a petty cash box at work. It feels contextually different. There is just less room for rationalizations when you take out money out of a petty cash box than when you take a pencil from work. You can come up with all kinds of other reasons for that seem okay. And we try to get at that with an experiment. And I want to show you what we found. So we had, again, this cheating task. So imagine we had one group that didn't have any chance to cheat. We had one group that had a chance to cheat because they were asked to shred their test sheet and then just self-report their performance. And then we had a third group where we told them for each matrix you solve, you will get a token from the first experimenter. And then with these tokens, you walk out and the second experimenter will exchange each token for 50 cents. So the payoff is exactly the same, but now you have an intermediate. You're not changing for money. The direct consequences of your actions are less direct. You're making it almost also more of a game. And when you look at what happens to the number of matrices that people report having solved in a cheating condition, magically people are performing better, supposedly because they're cheating. And when we introduce these tokens, this intermediary, cheating goes way up. And so I think this is an experiment that shows very nicely the risk of indirect consequences, because as a society, we are more and more removed from the final consequences of our actions. When we just think of, we are more removed from cash, instead we're dealing with stop auctions or credit cards. And also this may be one of the reasons when you look at employee theft and fraud, which has been estimated several years ago at over 600 billion, why that number is so high. So the second takeaway is we have a lot of rationalization tools that help to be dishonest. And so now with this in mind, the question becomes, well, we have the tools for those few bad apples that don't care about morality. So there it's law enforcement, basically. But what can we do with the people like you and me who give in by a small amount because they can rationalize this to themselves? What can we do there to get them back to the path of honesty, because they care about morals after all? And so one direct consequence from the previous experiments that I just showed you is, well, you have to think about ways how you can make the intentions or the consequences of one's actions clearer. And I don't have time to go into this experiment, but I think a nice example is when you think about filling out a tax form. Like, imagine that instead of telling individuals, if you didn't have extra income, just leave the cell empty, which is basically an error of omission then, because if you don't fill it out, you can always say, oh, I didn't see that cell, I didn't pay attention. But if you actively have to write in a 0 and you did do that, and that was a lie, that is harder. And now take it even a step further. Imagine that it's already pre-filled with maybe last year's numbers and this year's are not very different. What happens then to cheating? And I have a research paper on that with my former Rodman colleague, Scott Hawkins, on that, where we look at this. But also think what other ways how you can increase awareness for one's moral standards. So would, for example, asking people to sign an honor code influence deception? And that's what we tested with this experimental paradigm that we have developed. So imagine again, you have 3 groups of people, one that does not have a chance to cheat, one that does have a chance to cheat because they shred their test sheet, they only self-report how many matrices they have solved, and then they're being paid according to that. And then imagine a third group that is exactly like the cheating condition, but on the test sheet. So the test sheet that you as a participant are going to shred later on, you have to sign, I understand that this short survey falls under the, and then since we ran this at the university's name and then honor system. So given that our participants, in this particular case, students, signed this on a sheet that they shredded, we were never even able to check whether they signed the honor code. And again, they can still cheat because the test sheet is gone. They're just self-reporting how well they did. And we see when people have a chance to cheat, they do so. But when they have a chance to cheat, but before that, they were asked to sign an honor code, cheating goes away. Now, the interesting thing here is we ran a study at various universities, even at universities that do not have an honor code to begin with, yet it is still working. And recently in the US White House SPS team, so the social behavioral science team, adopted this kind of idea together with the General Service Administration. And I'm sorry that the slide is, that the screenshot is not so good, where vendors of goods and services to the federal government, before they self-reported their sales, were asked at the top to to type their signature next to this sentence, I promise that the information I'm providing is true and accurate. And they compared that to the standard procedure where people do not have to do that. And they found that just by adding this statement and having individuals type their signature, they were able to collect an additional 1.6 million in fees within a single quarter as a result of that box. Now, you can take this further and think of, well, are there other ways how you can make people more aware of their moral standards or their social norms? You may be able to ask questions such as, how important is honesty to your family? Or are you a proud citizen of your country? Would you steal from a friend? Or taking advantage of social norms. There have been recently several really wonderful experiments in the tax compliance domain using social norms. So reminding people how many other people are doing the right thing and that you are in the minority of people that are doing the wrong thing. And that has increased tax compliance really well in the UK, I believe also in Guatemala and a few other places. So using the power of social norms can be quite powerful. There's also research by Christopher Bryan, Gabriel Adams, and Benoit Monin showing that you want to, when you have messages where you try to appeal to people's moral behavior, you want to personalize them. You want to implicate the self. Don't cheat is just an action, but if you make it personal, Nina, don't be a cheater, much more powerful. Or your taxes have not been paid on time, make it personal, implicate the self. You have not paid your taxes on time. And we have done such personalization interventions also in the tax compliance realm and in Canada to some extent, and have been very successful with this. There's other work, for example, here by Bates and Nettle and Roberts, showing that just the perception of being observed by putting, for example, a pair of watching eyes somewhere makes people behave differently. Setting very clear, specific, personalized rules of conduct is also very important. This is work by Mulder and my friend Jennifer Jordan and Rink from 2015. So for example, you say, you should not accept gifts from mutual fund providers. This is much less subject to motivational reasoning or rationalization than a very general abstract rule that says advisors should not engage in conflict of interest. Now, clearly you cannot set such specific rules for all situations, but at least for the most critical ones, I think it is very useful to think about, can you do that? So what I want to leave you when it comes to, what I would like to leave you with when it comes to this talk is, first of all, on a very, very positive note, in all of the studies that we have run, we over and over find that people are mostly honest. So that is really the wonderful thing. Even when there is no outside enforcement, people are mostly honest. They do have morals that keep them on the right track. Now, the problem is that good people can temporarily become bad people because of our ability to rationalize. And those abilities to rationalize are stronger, I think, than many of us think. And they're always present. And so I think it's very important as companies and also as HR people to be aware of what are the factors that facilitate rationalizations. And is there anything that you can do to reduce those factors, or at least think of interventions in situations where you see the context lends itself more that there will be rationalizations. And what my research and many of my colleagues' research is looking into, can we come up with gentle nudges and interventions that do not impose on the freedom of individuals or require the passage of new legislation or require high implementation costs that can deter transgressions? And we are not so much interested in things that you do way before. So that is education training, ethical training. It's definitely important. And also the whole law enforcement regulations rule, also very, very important. I'm not saying this is not important, but I'm saying it's also important to think about what can we do in the moment of temptations to get people to stay on the right track. And this is where most of our research has been focusing on. And aside from thinking about interventions in those moments when it's most important, so and here again, I have a few. This is just basically a summary here of what I've already said. Think of reminders. Think of having somehow commitment devices at the start, for example, of a meeting with a client. Have a concrete checklist where individuals need to check off that they've done everything. Have random pop-up questions. So there are a bunch of ways where I would invite you to be creative and think about ways how to implement nudges at the point of temptation. But there are also obviously changes in organizational culture and processes before and after temptations that are needed. And I'm sure that you have already heard a few speakers or will hear more speakers talking about that. Things such as publicly acknowledging and recognizing role model behavior is super important there. So I will leave it at that. I know I'm a little bit earlier than what I had, 4 minutes, but that gives us more time for Q&A, and I'm very curious to hear what questions the audience has.
Wow, it has been outstanding. I personally love this stuff. Cheating in organizations is, HR people should pay attention to all these issues, because sometimes cheating can break relationships, performance, collaboration, all these kind of things. Wow, I think we have a starting point for HR people to pay attention to this, and how could we implement some actionable steps that you Nina pointed out. Well, we have some questions. Nina, do you think people's dishonesty can be effectively and objectively measured in organizations at the individual level? Similarly, can we measure people's perception about the likelihood of being caught?
Let me start with the latter, because that's easier to answer, for me at least. So can you measure people's perception about the likelihood of being caught? I would say yes. I mean, if you just think of that one slide that I had up there with a pair of eyes watching you, it's very, very indirect way to make you remember, oh, I may get caught. And I think also, like, for example, we recently did an experiment with a tax authority in Poland where we tried different type of messaging in letters to people that were non-compliant with their taxes, and we varied the language that we used to express what the consequences would be. So some letters felt more strict than others, and the idea here is very much so that some of those letters make you feel like that the likelihood of an audit is much higher than others, even though we did not provide any numbers of what is actually the likelihood of an audit. But this is exactly what we try to do, changing the perception of the likelihood of an audit. And it really depends on the situation in which you're in, but there are absolutely ways to affect that. And I think that is relatively easy to do. Now, do you think people's dishonesty can be effectively and objectively measured in organizations at the individual level? I have not done that type of research. I'm sure. So I'm thinking of some work by Lamar Pierce, who I remember vaguely. So I'm sorry that I cannot do a good job here summarizing.
No worries.
But he has been working on, I believe, restaurants where there is some oversight with regards to the waiters, how much money they get in, what the ticket value was or the receipt value, and there is software that seems to track that. But but it's really not my level of expertise. I usually try and get a sense of whether on average we can move the needle and we can find differences in how much money, for example, we are getting in with the taxes or with an insurance.
Yeah, that's great. One question more. Reminders can work in the short term, but people learn to ignore them after a while. How can we best make nerve nudges more persistent?
Yes, very important question. So whoever asked it has definitely thought a lot about nudges. That is one of the challenges that we as researchers have, but then also from an applied world, like what do we do with this? So many of our experiments are one-shot experiments. So there is also some newness to when individuals are exposed to this, right? And they work. And if those interventions in the real, and if you can use those insights in the real world to implement these interventions cheaply, I would say, even if it only works maybe for one season,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
It is worth it. Yeah.
Then you think again of changes. Okay, well, what are you changing next time? So my intuition would be you have to keep an element of newness in there. So you would have to constantly change things. So it's a cost benefit analysis. Is it worthwhile the effort? Is it worthwhile the cost? Like in a setting like if it just simply changing something on a website like every month, so that may be easy to do, but it may not be possible in all kinds of other environments. So I definitely think we also need more research, fundamental research, to understand that better.
Yeah.
It's very hard to run experiments over a longer period of time because there aren't just that many opportunities. But I can tell you, for example, it also depends on how often people are exposed to those interventions. That matters too. So it's not just for how long are you using those interventions, for how long are they in place, but how often are people exposed to this? Because, for example, with one of our tax experiments in Canada, we actually ran the same intervention for 2 consecutive years.
Mm-hmm.
And for 2 consecutive years, we find that the same nudge worked, and we don't find any decrease in its effectiveness. And if you think about it, it makes sense because you're thinking about the taxes only in the moment when you have to file them. And then for a whole year, you're not thinking about it, and you may not even know anymore, like what was the nudge that you encountered the year before. If you have a memory like me, you certainly will not remember, right? So it really depends on the situation, but yes, I agree with whoever asked that question. It is a very important one, and it is not an easy one to solve if it's about something that people are exposed to on a very, very regular basis. But I don't want to say it's not possible because I like challenges, but we just don't have much evidence on that. But if anyone has also an environment where we could test those kind of ideas out, you know where to find me.
Yeah, I think we should study case by case. No, talking about the nudges, if a nudge works, okay, you can keep it sometimes, and then you can, because our brain is prepared to pay attention to the newest things. As you mentioned. Oh, absolutely amazing. What variables correlate with dishonesty?
Oh,
yeah.
There's one more thing. So you were just touching on one very important thing. Which is that when you apply nudges or insights from behavioral sciences in the real world, I think it's very important that companies understand that they do measure on a regular basis. So there is a feedback loop so that you can see, are you still getting the effects that you're looking for? Or are you maybe even getting some new effects that you didn't expect, either positive or negative, and then have the flexibility to act upon them? I think that is very important. It's not a thing.
Yeah.
Implement something once and you walk away and you think that it's always working and always also working in the intended way.
I totally agree with that. Our mantra is one size doesn't fit all. We need to study case by case and see what is effective. Great, Nina. Some people are intrinsically honest while others behave as if they are. In work, the threat of being punished makes people to do the right thing, but they are not honest. Just rule followers?
So
You can see here in the chat box.
If they are in the threat of being punished makes people do the right thing. Yes. So that's why I was saying it is definitely also important that we have the rules and the regulations. But the thing is, we also, so I think in the past there has been a lot of focus on studying exactly those people that pretend that they are honest, but they're not really. And what keeps them in check is those rules and regulations, right?
Yeah.
And there are certainly also the people that are intrinsically honest, and they're always honest. But there is this wide range in between that hadn't been studied for a long time, and understanding how do these people behave. That is basically what I was showing today. But I do, for example, also have some newer work, primarily with Crystal Reek, where we are trying to learn from those people that are able to stay honest and righteous, even in times of the biggest transgressions. What can we learn from them that may help us with that big group in the middle? So it's a different perspective that I definitely think is important to look at.
Absolutely great. Probably the last one, Nina, what variables correlate with dishonesty? Is there any research on that? Age, gender, income, personality traits? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm assuming there is research on it. It's just not something that I've been focusing on. So in our own work, I can tell you that we did not find gender differences. So every time I'm giving a talk, I'm being asked, oh, like women ask me. And I always have to say, I'm sorry, we don't find any consistent evidence that one group cheats more than the other group. We really don't. In terms of age, again, we haven't seen anything. But, it is also in part because to really get at individual differences, you need much bigger samples to really look at heterogeneity. And so, for example, one thing where we are now able to look at heterogeneity is our text work in Poland, because we have such a big sample. It was done on the entire population that was late, right? And so now we can really get at some very interesting questions, such as people in the rural world. So people who live in cities versus that live outside of cities. Do certain interventions, for example, work better for one group than for the other? We also see differences by age. We can also look at differences by gender, and then really also see what interventions work best for which type of group. But that I'm just starting to explore now. I'm sure there are other researchers, especially personality researchers, more from the psych side, that have looked at that. But in our behavioral work, I can tell you age and gender so far, I really can't tell you much about this. No consistent result.
I think that if there isn't or there aren't gender differences, this is good news. I think. Nina, thank you. Can't thank you enough for your time. What a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for all the insights. Much needed. Much needed for HR community to know more about behavior, dishonesty, all these things. Thank you very much, and see you soon and talk soon.
Thank you.